In this problem, Vasya wants to visit his classmate Petya, who lives in apartment N. And Vasya wants to figure out which floor Petya lives in. So how Petya's apartment complex works is on the very first floor, there's apartment 1 and 2. And then for every floor above, there will be X apartments. So now let's look at this in the context of a test case. So let's say Petya lives in apartment 22, and after the first floor, there are 5 apartments per floor, right? So what does that look like? So that means the very first floor, that'll be apartment 1 and 2. The next floor would be 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The next would have floors ranging from 8 till 12, then 13 till 17, and then 18 till 22. So from this, we know that Petya lives in apartment 22, which is on floor 5, which is exactly what the answer says, 5. So now how do we figure out which floor? So if Petya lives in apartment 1 and 2, we know he lives in the very ground floor. So we just output 1. Otherwise, we had to take into account the number of apartments per floor. So first let's take into account this offset. So let's say he lives in an apartment number higher than 3. So taking into account this offset, we can change all these numbers to become 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, then 6 to 10, then 11 to 15, and then 16 till 20. So what I've done here is for every apartment higher, I've just subtracted 2. So now this 3 corresponds to this 1, this 4 corresponds to this 2, and so on and so forth. And now the key thing to know now is that this 22 corresponds to this 20, right? So since we aren't including the very first floor, the answer we will get here, we'll just add 1 to it at the very end. So if you look at apartment 20, right, so this corresponds to apartment 22 in which Petya currently lives in. So 20 over the number of apartments per floor, which is 5, and we want to find the upper bound of that, and this is equivalent to 4, and then we have to add the 1 because we aren't including the very first floor, so therefore we get 5. Now why is this right? So let's say if Petya instead lived in apartment 21, right? So he lives right before apartment 22. Once we make this conversion, he will now be living in apartment 19 right here, right? If we do 19 over 5, and if we don't do the upper bound, this becomes 3, and then 3 plus 1 is 4, which is not what we want. But over here, if you do the upper bound here, then this also becomes 4, and then we take into account the 1 for not including the ground floor, and we get 5 over here. So that's why we take the upper bound. So now let's just throw this up. So first thing first, we have t test cases, and then now what we can do is we can say we're given the room number of Petya and then amount of apartments per floor after the very first one. We read that in. So if Petya's apartment number is either 1 or 2, then we know he lives on the ground floor, so we can just output 1. Otherwise, we take into account the offset of 2, and then we output n plus x minus 1 over x plus 1. And I think this should work. Oh, 31577. Yep. So this is just by adding x minus 1 here, that's a easier way to find the upper bound, because since we're dividing something by x, if we add x minus 1 to the top part of the fraction, then that won't increase it, because in C++ if we divide, we find the lower bound. So this is just a fast way to find the upper bound. So hopefully this should work. And voila,